Good morning.
Hello.
Good afternoon. Good morning.
Good afternoon. Good morning. Good evening.
Good.
Good morning, everybody. Everybody. You ready to start?
I think we are. Some participants are still joining, but I think we can start.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for being today. It's Friday. I think all of you, everybody's ready to go on the weekend. Actually, here there will be a long weekend because Monday we have holidays. We're very welcome to participate. I think this is a very, very important webinar that was organized within the scope of work of the ICO and the Coffee Public-Private Task Force. And I'm very grateful, we are all very grateful for our member, the European Union, that has accepted and is, is with us to provide more insight on this very important regulations. At the outset, as the ICO, we are mandated by the International Coffee Agreement under the current one, 2007, to assist ICO members and all stakeholders in the assessment, recollection, and all the trade-related measures that affect the coffee sector. So in this perspective, we have, as you probably recall, already had last year, at the end of last year, two webinars, one on the German due diligence and the other one on the EU, again, to bring all the members up to speed on changing the regulations. The second point I'd like to make is that within the task force, another important milestones was reached just a couple of days ago. We were waiting for the possibility to also have a subgroup on the policy and institutions matching the one on exporting members on importing members. And we are also very, very, again, grateful to the European Commission that has accepted to run that workshop. We had a very preliminary but successful meeting the other day, also discussing about regulation in general, not only the EU, but the UK and the others. So without further ado, I think the opportunity today is really to understand, and I would like to do just to be more interactive, and then I see Mr. Touré is asking for the floor.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I just want to make an observation.
Yes.
There's no translation provided, right?
For this one, I'm afraid we are not able to. This is within the task force, and there are no provisions. On the other end, Your Excellency, the EU within this subgroup for importing members, policy and institutions, they kindly provide interpretation. So whoever wants to join that group, Spanish and French are being provided within this the subgroup, as was the case for UNDP for the other group. So, but in this one we are unable.
It's so unfortunate. This subject is so much important that, as you know, I'm from a Francophone country.
Right.
And it's so unfortunate that there's no translation. It's just an observation. Thank you very much.
It's Ambassador Touré, I fully understand. And then what I would say that this is a first webinar, and maybe one of the possibility would be to provide documentation. I believe that at the beginning of some times ago, we have the documents received by the Commission also in the different languages. And those documents, I believe, we will hear that would be available. But the seminar itself, I think, yeah, we know due to lack of resources, it would be all in English. Thank you so much. Ambassador Farani.
Yes, thank you, Gerardo. No, I just want to add my voice to Ambassador to his complaint. I think it's a very important subject, and this should translation should be provided to the other members, since they have to understand very well what we're talking about, and we expect them to react also to some of the points that we presented here. But it's so I would like you to have in mind that in some cases, I think ICO has to spend its budget in the best way possible. In this case, is one of them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is noted. From my side.
Excuse me, Patakoni.
Oui.
I'm sorry, but you know that the European ICO is not the first or the only organization where they are talking about due diligence and deforestation. But ICO is the only organization who can organize such important seminars with no translation. And it's unfortunate because we had a very significant contribution to make today, but it will not be possible. I'll wait for another opportunity when there is translation so I can make my remarks. And that's the view of most Francophone countries, I can tell you, because as you know, I represent the continent in the ICO, and we see that as a discrimination. It's just an observation again, it's not a complaint. And I hope that next time when ICO organize such a important, because I'm sure that you've heard that a lot of producers are worried about this new legislation of the European Union and the impact on small producing countries. So I don't understand how can you even organize a seminar like that with no translation? I don't understand. Thank you.
Just okay. Let me just give you. Well, first of all, you know, we are in the transition today between one executive director and the other. I'm not sure, you know, if they will be able to participate. But the only thing I'd like to make is this is not the council. This is organized within the Coffee Public Private Task Force, and there are no provisions in that budget, but also in the ICO budget. There was no, you know, funding for translation, but I totally and fully understand and share your concern, and this concern I think will have to be addressed. That I can also take this responsibility to bring this to the new executive director. So if there are no other issue before we start, we would like to start before asking a simple question to understand what is the level of understanding in this, and then so just we would like to quickly answer that just to set the scene about that. Okay. So you please kindly try to reply, and then we try to see how is the level of knowledge of this very large and diversified group attending this. Is a technical workshop on this matter. And this, I think, will help both Astrid and Carla to also when they make the overview of the presentation. I think we can give another minute. I see from this, and I think that's would be the level of introduction for the presenters of the EU initiative on deforestation free product or supply chain. Just to understanding that this is, again, it's a technical workshop, and I apologize, but will be run in English only. This is the level, so you have about 20% that are fully aware of this new regulation. About 40% they are familiar, so they have a knowledge but you have about 42% of the participants here, they have limited or they are not familiar with that. So that, I think, is just to set the scene. And then I would like to just start to item 2 of this. As I said, this is not a formal meeting, is a technical meeting within the task force. And we have the great honor and opportunity to have a High Representative of the European Commission, Astrid Schumacher, from the DG Environment, that of course is behind the organization and all the elements and the technicalities. And also, I think the first time we have the opportunity, very welcome to Carla Montesi. She is from the DG INPA, former DEFCO, who are normally our counterpart at the ICO. So thank you very much for coming. And yeah, we're just ready to hear from you more details. So I believe Astrid will present, and then Carla will. Thank you.
Yes,
Astrid, you have the floor.
I will. Thank you so much. Thank you for the introduction. It is a pleasure to be with you. As a person who's never far away from a coffee machine, I was really looking forward to this opportunity this afternoon. And I do appreciate it is a Friday afternoon, and for some it is even a Friday evening, and for some it is an early morning. So we're very grateful that so many could participate and are interested. I will attempt to speak slowly, more slowly than I usually do, to try and help a little bit with the linguistic difficulties. I thought if it is helpful, and I'm looking a bit towards you, Gerardo, if you're not or not, we could perhaps in the chat also provide the link to the French and Spanish versions of the proposal, so that colleagues would at least have that text in front of them and can perhaps follow that a bit. And yes, Luis Alberto, we know that many coffee producing countries are Spanish speaking. Anyway, I'll do my best to speak clearly and slowly. And I just wanted to start with one word of scene setting. Why are we here? Why are we having this discussion about a new deforestation regulation? From the perspective of the European Union, I think we are very aligned with the vision of the United Nations that we are facing currently a triple planetary crisis of climate change, of biodiversity loss, and of pollution. And it is very clear, and I think frequently underlined in the scientific literature, that it is unsustainable consumption and production that contributes and that drives this crisis. Now, in the European Union, we have something called the European Green Deal, and that is a comprehensive policy approach that looks at these crises and challenges and tries to find the appropriate answers in terms of policy incentives, but also in terms of regulation, looking at the environmental footprint of the EU and of us as a developed economy that consumes a lot, also consumes a lot of coffee, and I'll come to that in a moment. And what is important for us in all of that is that we do not only address what is happening on the European market, but we are also cognizant of the fact that our consumption has an impact beyond the borders of the European Union and drives deforestation or forest degradation around the world. And that is something we believe we need to address. And in particular, we live in a democracy here. In particular, it is something also our citizens have said we need to address. And that is a bit the background to the regulation I wanted to introduce to you. If we can maybe move to the next slide, just in terms of further contextualization. We all know that deforestation is linked to climate change and biodiversity loss. In fact, the IPCC has said 11% of global greenhouse gas emissions are linked to deforestation and forest degradation. So this is a fact. It is also a fact that the world, governments, industry, stakeholders have for quite a while tried to come to grips with this problem, to address this problem, and many, many voluntary initiatives have already been undertaken and commitments made. including incidentally in the SDGs to halt deforestation by 2020. And despite all of these commitments, unfortunately, we keep seeing a lot of deforestation. And we see, in fact, looking just as the past 30 years, we see 420 million hectares of forest were lost worldwide. To put this in context, this is an area larger than the European Union. So this shows to us that despite all the good initiatives that are there, we need to do more, and we certainly need to build on those, but we also need to go further. A second important observation is that the European Union has been working on deforestation for many, many years, in particular through the Forest Law Enforcement Governance and Trade Action Plan that dates back to the early 2000s. At the time, it was illegal logging that was the main driver of deforestation around the world. This has changed. Today, 90% of deforestation is provoked by the expansion of agricultural land, and a lot, incidentally, of that is taking place illegally. Now, this expansion of agricultural land is linked in particular to a series of commodities, and the European Union is a major consumer of those commodities. And as such, what we are consuming in the European Union is driving and is associated with deforestation and forest degradation around the world. In more concrete terms, next slide, please. We have been looking to understand what is our impact, and the regulation, as I will mention in a moment, will cover six commodities. The EU is responsible for 19% of the consumption of those commodities and of the associated loss of forests in hectares. But looking at cocoa and coffee in particular, we consume a lot of this in the European Union, and it is in fact the EU responsible for 44% of loss of forest associated with the production of coffee. So that I just wanted to say in terms of providing a bit of general background. Now on the next slide, please. What is it we actually want to achieve? Now, our overall objective, I think, becomes clear from what I've been saying before. It is about minimizing the contribution of the European Union to deforestation and forest degradation worldwide. So reducing the greenhouse gas emissions and the biodiversity loss that is caused by our consumption. More specifically, we want to minimize the risk that products coming from supply chains associated with deforestation and forest degradation are placed on the EU market. And we want to increase the EU demand for and trade in legal and deforestation-free commodities and products. Next slide, please. Now, those of you who live in the European Union or who have been observing the European Union, and I think if you are working in the coffee sector, many of you are following what is happening in our legislative and policy world. There have been a number of policy commitments, political commitments, that where we have been forthcoming for a number of years to say that we want to address the issue of deforestation and forest degradation. In particular, the European Green Deal, I already have mentioned it, has announced that we would take measures, regulatory and otherwise, to promote value chains that are deforestation free. We followed that up a year later with a biodiversity strategy and a farm to fork strategy that announced the legislative proposal in 2021, which I'm now currently presenting to you. And we have also had a lot of interest from member states and pressure from the European Parliament in particular, asking that such measures are being put forward. Next slide, please. Now, the way we do rulemaking in the European Union is we are not just sitting at our desks like I'm here in my office and inventing something, but we have a process we're calling better regulation. Better regulation involves in particular two things. First of all, doing a fitness check of the legislation we already have to understand whether the rules that we have, or to what extent the rules that we have, will enable us to reach the policy objective that I've just described. And then we're doing an impact assessment, and that means we're looking at options that there may be for achieving the policy objective, and we're assessing those options. Now, in the concrete example we're discussing in the deforestation regulation, we had the EU timber regulation and we had the forest law enforcement governance and trade regulation. And when we fitness check these, so that's a scientific analysis, but it is also done with public input, with stakeholder participation, etc. We found that our existing legal framework did a lot in terms of raising awareness and transparency in the supply chains for timber. But the lessons learned also included that there were challenges in the implementation, there are challenges in the implementation. Those include the ability of operators to validate information obtained from their supply chain and many others. And the voluntary partnership agreements that are a salient feature of our current system regulating illegal logging. Those were also assessed positive in terms of multi-stakeholder dialogues and in terms of stimulating governance reforms in many countries. But on the other hand, looking at it strictly from a deforestation perspective, they proved to be long, complex, and resource intensive to negotiate. And in fact, after 15 years or more than 50 years of having this policy, only one country out of 15 has managed to put in an operational licensing system in place. So that was something that did not allow us to achieve the objectives we had set. So we have then looked at, as you can see on the slide, approximately 20 different options of what we could do differently. And we have discussed, we've analyzed these options scientifically. There are impact assessment documents which are available on our website. We have done stakeholder meetings. We have a multi-stakeholder platform on deforestation with more than 250 participants, also from partner countries and international organizations. We have done targeted interviews with the EU and partner countries, and an open consultation, which has been, in fact, the highest, has elicited the highest number of replies from the European public, demonstrating the interest that there is in the public to sort of not continue contributing to deforestation worldwide. Next slide, please. Now, the scope of the regulation proposal, I recognize I'm a bit behind time, but this is linked to me trying to speak a bit more slowly. The scope of the regulation proposal, first of all, which are the commodities we are focusing on? Palm oil, soy, wood, cattle, cocoa, coffee, and some derived products such as leather, chocolate, or furniture. We have selected this particular scope looking at where the European footprint is biggest and where therefore a European regulatory intervention would have the greatest effect. This regulation will apply both to domestically produced and imported commodities and derived products. And importantly, it has a progressive scope. So initially, it covers the 6 commodities you see on top of the screen, some derived products. This will be updated regularly, and I think we can expect it will be expanded regularly, in particular with further derived products being integrated. Now, very importantly, and really very important, there is a cutoff date of 31st December 2020. What does that mean? Commodities are not allowed to enter the EU market if they are produced on land subject to deforestation after that date. But it also means only. So commodities are not allowed to enter the EU market only if they are produced on land subject to deforestation after the 31st of December 2020. That immediately means that the vast majority of trade that is currently ongoing is, of course, not affected. Why the date 31st of December 2020? This is the date, and I've mentioned it already, that is in the Sustainable Development Goals number 15. This is the date by which the global community, all countries around the world have said, we have decided to stop deforestation by that date. So this is the date by which the European Union has also said, we now have to stop to drive deforestation through our consumption in third countries. Next slide, please. Now, how do we want to achieve what we are achieving? We are building on what we already have in place, and what we already have in place, you've seen it before, is the EU timber regulation that has set up a due diligence system. So we are continuing this with this idea of mandatory due diligence for all operators that place the commodities and products in scope on the EU market or export them from the EU. What does it mean in practice? Only products that as a result of the due diligence have been confirmed to be deforestation free and legally produced would be allowed to be put on the EU market or to be exported from the EU market. This due diligence has to be carried out by the operator, and it needs to be covered, documented if you want, by a due diligence statement. When we are sort of asking operators to check and to verify whether their products they put on the market are deforestation free or do not contribute to forest degradation, we are using existing definitions, notably those coming from the FAO, but also those already used in EU legislation, for example, on renewable energy. The main obligations are applicable to operators and non-SME traders as well, so also to large traders. Strict traceability is another core feature, and I think one we probably will be discussing. It is a core feature because it is only by linking the commodity to the plot of land where it was produced that it will be able for enforcement authorities, that enforcement authorities in particular will be able to check whether or not what we find on our markets has contributed to deforestation. We will be setting up an information system which will host all the due diligence statements that are put forward by the operators and the related information to then facilitate also the enforcement by member states and discussions between member states on market developments. Next slide, please. Also a very important feature of the proposal is the benchmarking system. Again, what does it mean? The benchmarking system allows to assign risk categories to countries or parts of countries according to the level of risk of deforestation, which could be low or could be normal or could be high. There will be a dialogue and information exchange with partner countries around the world in order to inform the process to decide whether a country would be considered a low standard, a low risk, standard risk, or high risk. In practical terms for operators, if an operator is importing a commodity from a country or parts of a country that are considered low risk, the due diligence obligations will be simplified. If an operator, however, says, well, I would like to import my commodity from another country or from a part of a country where really deforestation is rampant, but I, as an operator, believe that what I import is clean and has not created further deforestation, then there will be no problem, there will be no ban. These commodities can also be imported from high-risk countries or parts of countries that are high risk, but they will then face enhanced scrutiny. Not more obligations, but enhanced scrutiny. So that is a risk-based approach, I would say, to enable also our competent authorities and our member states that have to check all these things to focus on those imports that carry imports, or it doesn't have to be an import, but also be placed on the market as a domestic commodity from those countries or parts of countries that are considered to be high risk. So to be focusing on the high risk. We are suggesting that there should be a minimum level of inspections for member states authorities to perform. And of course, also that there should be effective, proportionate and dissuasive penalties, because we would like this regulation not to just be a paper tiger, but to be having an impact in practice. Next slide, please. And now I come to a very important element, and you've already mentioned my colleague Carla Montesi, who's with us from the Director General of International Partnerships, and she will elaborate further. But I just want to say this is an integral part of our proposal, the cooperation with partner countries. We are aware of the fact that we are covering around 60 billion euros worth of yearly trade. So it is important that we are working together with partner countries and that we are stepping up cooperation to ensure that these EU partners are able to comply with the regulation and to reap the benefits of the new rules on deforestation. And Carla will speak more about the various forms of cooperation, but they start with forest partnerships and political dialogues, and like the cocoa dialogues and many others. At the same time, we do not only want to work with consumer countries, but also with the producer countries, apologies, but also with other consumer countries such as China, US, Japan. Yesterday we discussed with Australia, to just make sure that it is not just the European Union that sort of cleans up its supply chains, but that the global supply chain sustainability becomes something like a global gold standard. We're also discussing that, of course, in the G7 and in the G20. I'm coming to the end. Maybe just a few takeaways, and now I talk a bit faster because they just summarize what I've been saying before, but they're nonetheless important just to bear in mind. This regulation regulates the supply side. It regulates the EU's consumption. As such, it is part of a broader set of policies, and these policies were set out in a communication on stepping up EU action to protect and restore the world's forests, which we have issued in 2019. Again, this is available in various languages, and we can provide you with the links to the to other language versions than the English one. This communication sets out actions in 5 areas. It says, first of all, reduce the EU consumption footprint. We've been talking about that right now. Second, work in partnership with producing countries. I've already mentioned that. Carla will elaborate in a moment. Third, strengthen international cooperation. Clear. Fourth, redirect finance in support of more sustainable land use practices. Not directly covered by our regulation, but there's a whole range of initiatives in the European Union and also globally in order to direct finance, private finance, to more sustainable activities. This ranges from the EU taxonomy to transparency provisions, really a whole different vast array of legislative developments. And lastly, and also very importantly, support research, innovation, and access to information. Access to information in particular to make also the operators, to facilitate it for operators, the possibility to have the information they need in order to carry out the due diligence. The regulation we're discussing, I've said it before, aims to enhance trade in products from deforestation-free supply chains and creating more sustainable supply chains. I have now mentioned already several times the support to producing countries. I mention it again just because it is so important to us and because it is actually built into the regulation, a specific article dedicated to that. Next slide, and this is my last slide. Finally, you will say. To say again, it will have an impact on suppliers in their supply chain. We will work closely with partner countries and see how we can best support them. And I just want to highlight a set of principles that we are following and discussing now with the European Parliament and our member states, because maybe I have not said that in the beginning, this regulation has been a proposal from the European Commission. It is now in the legislative procedure. The European Parliament, or the directly elected representatives from 27 member states, and the Council, those are the representatives of governments of member states, are now looking at our proposal and making their own proposals for amendments. But the key principles that are here, I think, are certainly not under question. It's about transparency, accountability, and a sound scientific basis. It is about being consistent with our agreed international commitments, notably and in particular SDG 15 about halting deforestation at the levels of December 2020. And very, very importantly, and certainly not under attack, it is about non-discrimination, about equally treating domestic and imported commodities and products. Again, apologies for being longer than foreseen, but I tried to be as understandable as possible, even if not everybody has English as their first language, as I also do not have. Okay, thank you very much. And that is over to Carla.
Thank you very much, Astrid, and I think it was extremely clear. Very much appreciated. Let's move to Carla now, just to complete from the other part of the EU medal, if you want to see some of the elements that you mentioned about support to partner countries. Carla?
Yes, many thanks. And good morning or good afternoon or good evening to you. We started saying that it's a very pleasure to join you in this webinar. And also, if there is the language problem, really congratulations to ICO for having taken the initiative to organize this exchange. That it's a good occasion to deepen the Commission proposal. Now, Astrid, the presentation was, as you said, very exhaustive. So I will add just a few words to complement her presentation about our cooperation with the third countries in implementing this regulation. I think that you know already that addressing deforestation, forest degradation, focusing on conservation, restoration, sustainable use of the forest, and also ensuring that a transition to sustainable commodity production, consumption, and the processing are clearly between the main priorities of our international partnership, our dialogue with the partner countries. We have foreseen this cooperation in the rules of the regulation, and as Astrid mentioned, the regulation foreseen in one article that the Commission will use all the broad range of cooperation tools that are at our disposal in the international partnership. This could be policy dialogue, technical assistance, support to the reform, also the risk investment in your area. The idea is clearly that we want to cooperate with our partners, and depending on the willingness of the country to develop concrete partnership to joint address all the priorities that I just mentioned, and to address the priority for the future implementation of the regulation. Now, this partnership or cooperation mechanism that are foreseen in the regulation may include, as I was mentioning, structured dialogue. We have already in many countries policy dialogue in some sector. So really including structured dialogue, or support programs and action, or taking administrative arrangement. I will say everything that can be useful to support the work that a producer countries need to put in place just to ensure the transition to an agricultural production that will facilitate the compliance with the relevant commodities and the product with the requirement of the regulation. Now, of course, the effective engagements in the dialogue, the effective implementation of this forest partnership will be, of course, taken into account when we will look, the Commission will look to the benchmark. And I want just to mention once again that, as Astrid mentioning, the benchmark system envisaged from the beginning the fact that we need to have a regular exchange of information with the countries concerned, just to give them the opportunity to comment and, of course, to contribute to the Commission assessment on the compliance of the regulation. If I have to give an example of what are these cooperation mechanisms, allow me to mention the multi-stakeholder dialogue for sustainable cocoa, the so-called cocoa talks that is ongoing since now almost 2 years. That are talks that bring together really the different cocoa supply chain stakeholders, and the focus on traceability, focus on a reform process, taking into account in the 3 most concerned countries for the cocoa, Ghana, Ivory Coast, and the Cameroon. Maybe I will add, and that, of course, as Commission, we are aware on the challenges that the new rule may pose to the smallholder farmers. However, and as Astrid already underlined, deforestation is clearly unsustainable, and in the long term, everyone will suffer from the loss of biodiversity, for the forest ecosystem, the loss of the forest ecosystem services. So it will be, in our view, very, very important that we, from now, we actively engage with all the stakeholders, really to assess what they need to do to comply with the new rules. We can say that, of course, that the regulation will maybe take several years before the new rules become applicable. But of course, it will be essential that the action will be taken from now. So it's important that we raise awareness from now, and that really we encourage all the partner countries to work together with us towards meeting the obligation of the new regulation. All the actors will be concerned, all the actors in the supply chain will need to contribute to ensure the deforestation-free trade. So it's also about clearly ensuring the involvement of all the actors, of all the stakeholders. I can add that, of course, we can use our also our financial tools to help to support the relevant reform that the country will have to take to meet the obligation of the new regulation. So depending on the willingness of the concerned countries, we can mobilize the European Union funds coming from the EU budget, but coming also from member states, country by country, so clearly at the country level, to see what will be necessary to do in order to support the meeting of the compliance with the regulation. Activating dialogue platform will be very, very important. As I was saying, we need to have in place a cooperation structure that will ensure the full participation of all the stakeholders, including the civil society, including indigenous people, including the private sector, including the local communities. So starting very soon with this dialogue platform will be essential. In many countries have already good traceability system in place and are a part of certification schemes that, of course, will be taken into account for the country benchmark. But, of course, will be also very, very important to have this analysis country by country to see what it's necessary now to do in order to be compliant with the regulation. You can count on the use of our international cooperation and the partnership really to support the countries. But of course, first we need the policy dialogue, and we need to, once again, to count on the willingness of the country to engage in the process. We should also keep in mind that the due diligence obligation will fall on the companies which market their product in the European Union. This will lead to them guaranteeing also the sustainability of their supply chain. And therefore, support to the smallholders' supply in the country of origin will be also very, very important. I stop here. Unfortunately, I will not be able to stay for the debate, but as I was saying from the beginning, I'm sure that this is a first milestone in a long process of dialogue, and clearly the European Union, I want to assure you, remain open to any further discussion. And of course, our delegation all around the world will welcome any additional dialogue at the country level. So please don't hesitate to contact them, because at the country level, of course, they will be the first entry point for any exchanges on cooperation, on partnership, and I can assure you that they are ready to engage with you in this process. I stop here. Thank you very much for your attention. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Carla. I think, there are a number of very important elements in your presentation, but also the fact that you are here, but also your team in Brussels is engaged directly with the ICO. I think it's very significant. As I say, we wanted to organize this for some time. In the last meeting of the International Coffee Council, this matter was raised. And fortunately, we were planning this first event. As I say, this is just one of the action that as ICO, our members ask us to do, and this will be the opportunity today to see. But clarifying the not only the willingness but the commitment that you have to support members to, as you say, the company are the one that have to guarantee that the process is deforestation free, but what we need is really to work with the producing countries. And of course, we're focusing on coffee, and this is today's within the Coffee Public-Private Task Force. And EU is member of that, together with many of the industry representative and the countries, exactly as a platform, not only for discussing, but to fill this knowledge gap that we see at the beginning, but also to see how we can then get engaged, but also find possible solution to mitigate in case there are, possible impact on smallholder farmers. So that is the key. The reason why we are here is not just to inform, but also to see what can be done. And your commitment is very much appreciated. Now, we have a few questions now, and let me clarify at the beginning. We were discussing the very important matters of translation. The structure here is now that we have a few discussants that will see from their point of view what the European Union is driving towards this deforestation-free supply chain. And we have collected a mixture, as we always do within the task force. So have a combination of industry, some of the government, and then to see. So the idea that there are a few questions in the chat, we will keep the space at the end. But now I would just go and listen this discussant what they think about it from their point of view, because this is the forum under the task force to discuss the different point of view. So very quickly, and I try to ask everybody to be very short because there is a lot of questions to be raised by also members. But we wanted to know what is your view on that, and we're starting with the Hernando Duque from the Federación and the National Federation of Coffee in Colombia, FNC, together with one Esteban Ortuz, for the Colombian Coffee Federation. Then we have again from another key partner of the ICO and importing members, our friend Sebastian Lesch from the German Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development. Then we ask again another good friend, Mr. Dunya de Bella from the Ethiopian Coffee Tea Authority, and again two other discussants here that can give their view, because they're very much engaged as well in this process and they're very knowledgeable. Is Fanny Gauthier from Rich Forest Alliance and the dear Eileen Gordon and AT from the European Coffee Federation. So let's move to this. I can't see the chat at the moment, but I would rather see that they tell us what they think about it. And then we can open a discussion and a debate. And then to see again, not just to understand, but see what can be done. Hernando, tienes la palabra.
Gerardo, good morning, and good morning for all the people engaged in this important meeting. In name of the Coffee Growers Federation of Colombia, I want to tell you that the Federation has been working for more than 1 year, analyzing and taking information about this new interest of the European Union in order to guarantee that the products that are produced and imported from to the UEA will be produced under no deforestation scheme. And from the Colombian point of view, we have been very worried because of this legislation, because specifically in Colombia, our coffee production systems has been based on the research carried out in the National Coffee of Research in Colombia called CENICAFE. CENICAFE for more than 80 years has been producing technologies for the coffee sector in Colombia, and all of them has been created and developed in harmony of the use of the natural resource. In the specific case of Colombia, in the coffee sector, we don't see a major problem of deforestation because actually the coffee area has had a dynamic of reducing the coffee area in Colombia, and we have been working a lot in order to improve productivity in the coffee area, actually more than to expand the coffee area in coffee. So our effort has been addressed to increase productivity in order to look for more coffee production systems in terms of agronomic efficiency. So we don't see in our case a major difficulty on this, but we have to say that one of the main worries we have is, as we saw in the Astrid presentation, among a lot of difficulties, one of them is the traceability, because in the slide that she presented, there was a comment related to traceability of the coffee up to the plot of land that the producer. Colombia has a coffee sector based on small coffee growers, and Colombia have more than 2 million of coffee plots. So from the practical point of view, could be almost impossible to have traceability to the plot directly. This is one point that is quite hard to manage for us. The second one is in other conversation we have had with the people from the consultants from the European Union, we have been talking with them about to differentiate in the country for different agricultural sectors. And we would prefer, because it's more logical, that the deforestation should be analyzed into the coffee sector rather than at country level, because in any country could be deforestation in some so far areas. For example, in Colombia, in the south part of Colombia, near the Amazonas basin, could be deforestation, but not in the coffee areas. So it's important to differentiate what is the responsibility of the coffee sector with deforestation, rather than to have a national index or a national perspective in deforestation. Because at the end, the sector could have actions to avoid deforestation in the coffee production areas more than a national level. We think there is a confusion in this approach, because in different dialogues we have had with the consultants, they see that the index of deforestation maybe should be taken as a national level, which is more difficult to follow for specific sectors. Another point of view is most of the coffee producers countries are based on small coffee producers. 1 hectare, 1.4 hectares in coffee per person, which is a real challenge to manage this complex situation is going to be. So we want to say that we share the preoccupation, we share the idea related to deforestation, but the general proposal should imply to be analyzed individually, country by country, as Carla said in one of her statements. We will follow the development on this idea, and we will be able to share our experience, our knowledge, in order to construct the different strategies that the ICO wants to develop. Thank you, Gerardo.
Thank you very much. Muchas gracias. I don't know if Juan Esteban want to add something, or are we moving to Sebastian Lesch? I see no answer. So Sebastian, welcome back to the ICO. Good to see you.
Thank you, Gerardo. Same here. It's great to see everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you all. Thanks for inviting me to this important event today. As you all know, it's not only climate, biodiversity, and livelihoods that depend on forests, but also agriculture. Without the ecosystem services provided by forest agricultural production will face severe challenges. Therefore, preserving forests is not only in the interest of the environment community, but it's also in the long-term interest of businesses, farmers, and global food security. And I think that's quite an important point to start from. Now, as the FAO stated a couple of months ago, about 90% of global deforestation is driven by the expansion of agriculture. And obviously coffee is part of that, is one of the commodities that is responsible for deforestation. According to scientific projections, the deforestation footprint of coffee is likely to increase when production regions will shift due to climate change. So this is a very timely event, very good that we are discussing this today. I'm glad to see more and more political and private sector momentum for diminishing and minimizing deforestation driven by agriculture. There is, of course, the legislative proposal for regulation on deforestation-free products by the European Commission that we've been presented here. That is a milestone from the perspective of the German government, and I would really like to thank and congratulate the European Commission for preparing that very ambitious proposal. We are supportive of high ambition in that proposal and of effective implementation of that proposal, and we welcome the approach, which is based on due diligence but combined with a benchmarking that minimizes both illegal and legal deforestation and forest degradation. We are very much in favor of several of the ambitious elements in the proposal: the requirement of geolocalization, coordinates of traceability. For example, cocoa smallholders from Cote d'Ivoire have already expressed strong support for the traceability requirements, as transparent supply chains would support their sustainability goals beyond deforestation. And also, we support the provisions for a harmonized and stringent law enforcement across the European Union. This is a very important thing for us as well. We do support the expansion of the scope to natural rubber and to other ecosystems, and we're in talks about that with the European Commission, of course. And to ensure smallholders' inclusion in supply chains, Germany considers engagement and capacity building for producers as very important elements of corporate risk mitigation measures. And this is where we come in as a development ministry, because this is sort of our core business: support to stakeholders in the process, very concrete support as an important element of the policy making. We think that this regulation will make sustainable production a competitive advantage. It will support partner countries with their efforts towards the SDGs, towards the Paris Agreement, by obliging companies to live up to their responsibility for sustainable development. At the same time, we need strong cooperation between the EU and partner countries in order to really halt deforestation that is driven by agriculture, because that is a task that requires joint efforts from all the public and private stakeholders around the globe. So we very much welcome cooperation with third countries and their perspective on this. And this is also an element of why this event today is so important. We must provide incentives for forest preservation at deforestation hotspots. We must also foster the rights and livelihoods of local communities, of indigenous communities, for example, through living income strategies. And I think it's very important to not play off one against the other. So we as a development ministry would like to encourage the Commission to come forward with a strategy on specific production site measures complementing that regulation, including forest partnerships, including Team Europe initiatives that aim really at supporting producer countries and the producers themselves, notably the most vulnerable group. And we will be happy to contribute to such a strategy. We have a long track record of support for forest preservation jointly with our partner countries. I'm naming Ecuador, Colombia, Brazil, Indonesia, Cote d'Ivoire, reducing deforestation driven really by all the commodities, coffee, palm oil, rubber, cocoa, beef and soy, while also fostering the livelihoods and people's rights there on the spot. And of course, we also support the OECD and the FAO because they're quite relevant stakeholders in that process, key stakeholders, with developing a tool on deforestation, forest degradation and due diligence in supply chains to support the coffee sector, of course, not only the coffee sector, but to show that this is possible and how this is possible. We've joined forces with DG INPA, and it's great to see Carla Montesi here today, for a new program on minimizing deforestation driven by both domestic and international demand for agricultural commodities. And together with our key partner, France, we are currently initiating a global Team Europe initiative on deforestation free supply chains, and we invite other member states to join. And this is actually a very lively, very forward-looking debate. We very much welcome, Gerardo, what you are doing here, the efforts of the International Coffee Organization through the Coffee Public-Private Task Force, because you bring together the public and the private sector stakeholders of the coffee value chain. This is an ideal forum to really jointly seek solutions to the challenges the sector is facing, and deforestation is among those challenges. We have been funding key activities of the task force across thematic areas like living and prosperous income, market transparency, resilient coffee landscapes, all of them associated and connected to preserving forests, which is a really urgent global task. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much, Gerardo, and I hope for a lively debate afterwards. Back to you.
Thank you so much. Also, you've been very, very precise and concise with a lot of very interesting elements, and also restated well the partnership and the support you providing to the task force. I mean, it's very much appreciated, because all this is really thanks to your support. And I think yes, we're moving fast, so we have more space for discussion. But again, the idea is to combine different point of view, and appreciate your position, but also your engagement in then find solution when issues arise. I very much appreciated. And now I have the great pleasure also from a friend to another friend, from Adunya from Ethiopia. I hope he's able to connect. I can see it.
Yes.
Hello.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Gerardo. I really appreciate you refer to really set this Zoom meeting, and I still appreciate the European Union for creating this very important regulation, and also their interest to present and let us know the regulation ahead of time. So from the Ethiopian perspective, the Ethiopian coffee was actually born in forest, and that's why the Ethiopian coffee is having a very unique and valuable resources in the international markets. It's also a natural genetic contrabank for our future generation, and it's not only for Ethiopia, for all of coffee producing countries. The Ethiopian coffee forest is a natural genetic bank to conserve the different genetics of Ethiopian coffee. And still, this coffee continues to live in the forest, and the relationship that we are creating with forest is also very important. So not only as a genetic bank, the forest in which we produce coffee is also serve as an alternative source for our farmers, like, for example, such as getting wild honey, cardamom, and also different spices are produced in the forest. The Ethiopian government is also doing, it is level-based to restore and maintain the forests and the degraded lands by greening the Ethiopian land, so that we are also contributing to the pledge that we have entered in 2011 Bonn Challenge and 2014 the New York Climate Summit goal for restoring forests and deforested lands. We have also different mechanisms or initiatives, like, for example, as a participatory forest management, the biosphere reserves, in order to keep the forests intact as much as possible. And we have a strict controlled government system, in which case we improve the sustainability of our forest system and the coffee production in that forest system. And the community-based management approach is also another initiative that we have taken in order to just increase coffee production inside the forest system. So these are some of the activities we are doing to keep the forest as a genetic source and also to maintain the biodiversity of the Ethiopian coffees in general. But we have the different coffee production systems, like, for example, the forest coffee we have, and that's actually, there is also a semi-forest coffees that we are actually producing. And we have also garden coffee, where the farmers are producing on a small plot of land around there or vicinities. And we have only very few plantation coffee watts, that's quite less than 5%. But almost 95% of our coffees, they are all produced related to the coffee forests. The question that I am actually having to the European Union is probably that we have also the different certification systems, like the Rainforest Alliance, the organic certification systems are there. So how far this certification system can help us in these new regulations, and to what extent are we going to just explore the potentials that we have in this certification system to really support our farmers and also to enter into this European Union? This is one of the questions that I would like to raise. The other problems that we have, and the concerns that actually I have as a government, is that more than 95% of our coffees are produced by small-scale farmers. So they are having less than 2 hectares, they are having less than 1 hectare and something like that. From the traceability point of view, as a government, we can develop our own policies in order to create a very transparent supply chain for our European consumers. It's not a problem, and we can also build the accountability on how to produce a forest-free or deforestation-free coffee system in our system. But is it really possible? The same questions that I actually raised, the Colombian friend raised, to really trace and track all these small-scale farmers that are producing less than 2 hectares or less than 1 hectare, something like that. The other possibility, is there any intersection points where we can support each other, for example, to cover the costs of certifications, and so that we can enter into that kind of certification scheme in order to at least develop a confidences for our small-scale producers and the farmers who are actually relying entirely on this coffee system. The other problem is that, okay, this is a forest coffee, and that is a deforestation-free coffee is produced, and that was also exported to the international market. But how can we guarantee our farmers, like to rescue them from being affected by the international coffee price fluctuations? So is there any separate premium prices to be paid for this kind of coffee that is going to be supplied for our farm by the farmers themselves? The other, as I already mentioned, we have about 4 different coffee production systems. So is there any percentage which actually be said, okay, this is a forest coffee produced? Is it 50% forest, 40% forest, 100% forest, or what does that mean? And is there any percentage which has actually been set in order to really define or give a definition for a forest coffee? So these are some of the points that I would like to really raise to the European Union, but still Ethiopia is quite committed to closely working with the European Union to really produce the forest coffee, deforestation-free coffees, and in order to provide the premium prices and have high quality coffee in the international market. Thank you very much. Gerardo, back to you.
Thank you. I think I really appreciate your contribution, and of course, I mean, stressing how already is engaged, and also the system in Ethiopia is interacting with forest. And I think you raised a few questions that I mark, and I'm sure our friends will be able to answer that afterwards with relation to, you know, link with certification. I know is a big issue here. Again, question of how this traceability can be actually applied, and again, how that is related also to price. Now we have another two, you know, the timing is always short, but we ask, and I think they have been very diligent, both Fanny and Eileen, to give it their point of view, because they are very much engaged in this process from two different perspectives, that I think the plurality of views is guaranteed here. Fanny from Rainforest Alliance, I mean, you have interesting paper already produced, very much engaged. Give us your view and your highlights, so that would enable the participant to understand better and then see what we can do.
Yes, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, depending on where you are. Thank you very much for the invitation. I just wanted to start very briefly by presenting Rainforest Alliance, for those who maybe haven't heard of us. We are a global organization working towards more sustainable agricultural supply chains, and we have our own certification program. So we certify coffee, amongst other commodities. And as you said, Gerardo, we are also very active at the EU level, in particular on the proposed EU regulation on deforestation-free products. So hence my presence today. I will present some of the key elements of our position. So if we could go to next slide, please. Thank you very much. Yeah, so I wanted to start maybe with a focus on the key elements we would like to be maintained as part of the regulation, because we feel that these elements really form the core of the regulation and are essential for the regulation to meet its objectives, the one that Ms. Schumacher presented at the beginning of this meeting. And so, of course, these are some of the most controversial elements, but I will just go through them very quickly. So the first one is the prohibition element. We feel it's a very powerful tool to trigger change throughout the EU supply chains. It's an element that we can find in already existing EU regulations, like the EU timber regulation. So we would like this to be kept. The second element is the high ambition traceability requirements, which have been mentioned before. We are really promoting traceability as part of our own certification scheme, and we believe that this is an essential element for companies to be able to conduct proper risk assessments on deforestation. And that's not even mentioning all the co-benefits of traceability, including for the livelihoods of producers. The other element is the due diligence obligation. We also feel that it's a good process for companies to identify, assess, and address the risk in their supply chains. And finally, another element that is very important for us is the cutoff date in the past, but not too much in the past. So in this regard, we consider that the cutoff date that the Commission selected is a good compromise, because it's the cutoff date in the past, but it's also something that is implementable in many producing countries. And so, as I said, we really believe that this is the core of the regulation that really should be maintained throughout the legislative process. And rather than trying to water down these requirements, we feel that it's really important to think about how to implement those requirements, what resources are needed to implement them, and who are the stakeholders that need those resources the most. So I will come back to this point later in my presentation. So next slide, please. Yeah, I will move very fast on that one because I think we're quite over time already. But just to say that we feel that there are some improvements that could be done on the proposed regulation, in particular as regard the scope on many elements. So we feel that, for example, the rights of indigenous peoples and local communities could be included in the proposal because it's an issue that is completely interconnected with deforestation. So the regulation could be a good instrument to address this issue as well. We believe also that other ecosystems than forests could be included to avoid some leakage effects, and in particular, some crucial ecosystems that are already defined by the FAO. So it could be really an easy lift to include those ecosystems really from the outset. And finally, other commodities. So I think it's Mr. Lesh who mentioned that. We are also quite worried about the fact that rubber is not included. It's a quite high-risk commodity in many tropical landscapes. And this could also trigger a leakage effect from the production of some commodities to rubber. So yeah, something to take into account. Next slide, please. Yeah, I think we're stuck. But I can continue.
No, next one.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yes, so I focused a lot on our position on the regulation, but just to highlight, and that's the point that is very important for us, that it is a demand side measure and that as such, it's not going to deliver by itself on its own objectives. And one component that is very important, and Ms. Schumacher and Ms. Montesi presented on this, is the supply side measures. And we feel that so far, it's an element that had not attracted so much political attention. A lot of the attention is focused on the proposed regulation, which is fair and really relevant. But the fact that there is so much uncertainty on supply side measures and not a clear vision is really undermining the legislative process, and we feel could undermine the ambition of the final regulation. So we feel that it's really urgent to look into the supply side measures. And in particular, one step that we are really eager to see happening is that the Commission orders a thorough assessment of smallholders and communities' needs in partner countries to adapt to the future EU requirements and option to respond to these needs. Because it's all the more important as the impact assessment that was published with the proposal did not provide that much information on this. So it does mention that there will be probably some challenges for smallholders, but that doesn't go much further than this. So we feel that it's really overdue. We need this assessment and we need it as soon as possible. There is really enough time to conduct this before the regulation is adopted. And the subsequent action that we would like the Commission and the Member States to take is to, and I'm going to echo what Mr. Lesh mentioned before, is really to develop a comprehensive strategy on supply side measures, which could include partnerships and cooperation mechanisms to address the root causes of deforestation. So we feel that this aspect is already quite thought through by the Commission with forest partnerships, with multi-stakeholder dialogue. So that's a good thing. But we feel also that it should include some more targeted programs of support for producers to respond to the new EU requirements. And when I mentioned, for example, the traceability requirements, we feel that these are important, but we feel that it's important not to forget the fact that those requirements will probably be trickled down on producers, that it will mean additional burden, additional costs, that many small farmers or cooperatives may not have the capacity to collect or manage, for example, geolocation data, and that they just may be excluded from the EU market, while not even maybe being linked to deforestation. So these are really elements that should be considered and be the source of a thorough reflection on supply side measures. And I think this was already mentioned, there are already a lot of programs, instruments like Team Europe initiatives that could really be mobilized for this purpose. So yeah, if we could go next slide, please. So this is my final slide, just to end on the reflection on what can coffee stakeholders do in the next month. Just maybe a bit of background on the time frame. The window of opportunity to influence the content of the proposed regulation is really closing, because the Parliament and the Council are really moving really fast on their own position, and then they will start to negotiate. So we feel like what is really important to do at this stage, for the different stakeholders is to think about how to prepare for the implementation of this regulation and what can be developed in terms of accompanying measures. So as far as companies are concerned, for example, we feel like it's really important, and this is something that we communicate also with our partners, to really start investing in supply chains, in traceability, in risk assessment, start engaging with their suppliers, because the regulation is going to happen no matter what final form it takes. It is going to happen. There are other types of legislation that are also developed that will require same level of traceability. There are other markets that are also looking into similar type of regulations. So the companies that invest right now will really have an advantage in the next years. And the other element is that they should probably engage in multi-stakeholder initiatives to look for collective solutions, to pool the resources where these are the most needed. As far as partner countries are concerned, it's really important, and I feel like they're already doing this job, so that's really good, to identify the needs of producers to respond to the future EU requirements and really engage with the EU and its member states to develop joint programs and roadmaps. And as far as the EU and member states are concerned, so I will come back to my previous recommendations, that it's really important to conduct this assessment on smallholders and to develop this comprehensive strategy for supply side measures. And that's all for me. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much. I think you structure in a very clear way. And what I find interesting also with this ideas that you formulated on what could be the action required, and I think that would be, I will be sharing this when we go to the open discussion. Thank you so much. I know if you have papers you want to share, also the link, please feel free. We've been sharing some others, including other very important element. And I repeat, because there was a question, we will be sharing both the recording, the presentations, and also the links, because then through that you can have access to a lot of information also in different languages. Thank you, Fanny. Now we move to industry. There's somehow squeeze between producing and importing countries, and they are, as I say, they are called into a very important role. So let's see what Eileen from the European Coffee Federation, who is deeply engaged in this process with all its members, and see what she can share with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Gerardo, for the introduction, and good all times of the day to everyone. It's a real privilege to be here today. We really appreciate the invitation to be able to share our views with you today. So moving on to our first slide, please. We would really wish to highlight above everything our commitment, the sector's commitment to the European Commission's objective of protecting and restoring the world's forests. We're fully committed to driving long-term sustainability in our sector, to increasing the transparency and the traceability along our supply chain. And we're also more than committed to being a proactive part of the process, to be able to help reduce EU-driven deforestation and to promote sustainable business practices. Over the past years, the coffee sector has been very much involved in different initiatives to be able to improve the sustainability, the fairness, and the transparency along the supply chain. So something that is being done already, but obviously we need to build further on it. What we would really like to highlight, we are fully aligned with the objective of the regulation, but we would really like to stress the importance that we understand has the principle of proportionality. So we would really like to encourage that an approach is taken that is limited to what is strictly necessary to be able to ensure the objective of the regulation. So moving into our next slide, I would like to highlight the singularities of coffee. Before I do this, we would really like to also encourage, if we may, the European Commission to the fact that applying the same rules and definitions to significantly different supply chains as the ones that are targeted within the regulation, we believe doesn't really match the realities on the ground. And we believe it can make it very complicated for operators and also for national authorities to be able to implement the regulation. So we would really like to encourage that the European Commission may develop different guidance documents for each commodity in which specific due diligence requirements requirements or specific traceability tools and liability rules are displayed for the different commodities, understanding that we are very different. Just as an example of how different we are, here are a couple of singularities of the coffee supply chain. We would like to highlight the fact that over 90% of European coffee imports correspond to what we call mainstream, commercial, or regular coffee. These imports will apply abiding the rules of the market. So there's some specific quality specifications established by the market and also by the European clients, because the main objective of the coffee consumers is that they can drink the same type of coffee every time they enjoy a cup. So when you buy a specific brand, what they expect is that the cup will have the same taste profile. This can only be achieved by buying coffee as a commodity in bulk, because then the sorting will take place in the origin to be able to ensure that at the end of the day, the consumer will be able to enjoy always the same taste profile in his cup of coffee. We would also like to highlight the fact that each coffee container, a 20-foot coffee container that is imported into the EU, carries 20 tons of coffee. So this is the equivalent of 320 60-kilo bags. It is possible that each container can have up to 4,500 farmers supplying the coffee to ensure that we've got that container of coffee. So considering that we import 120,000 containers every year into the EU, we would be talking about over 500 million different data entries to be able to secure those imports into the EU. We would also like to highlight that in some countries there are specific regulatory frameworks. For instance, in West Africa, we've got the example of Kenya, of Tanzania, Ethiopia as well, in which coffee is brought in the auctions. So this means that exporters have a specific license to procure the coffee from the auction. Therefore, they will know the name, for instance, of the farmer or the cooperative that is selling the coffee at the auction, but the cooperative does not have the obligation to indicate where they're sourcing their coffee from. So this is a specific issue in regards to the traceability or of the information along the supply chain, just as an example of some national legislations that do come a little bit into conflict with the due diligence requirements of geolocalization to the plot level. And last but not least, we will also highlight as a singularity of the coffee sector that 50% of the coffee that we source is disenfranchised. So this means that it is brought not from a certification scheme, it's not brought from a cooperative, it's brought from farmers that are not selling directly. They sell through different intermediaries along the national supply chain, and therefore it's very difficult once again to be able to trace it back, because the end game is to sell a specific quality of coffee rather than bringing in coffee from a specific plot of land, which is more characteristic, obviously, for the specialty coffee. So therefore, with these singularities, we just like pointing out that geolocalization is a real struggle and a burden for all operators. And we believe that tracing back all coffee to the plots of land does not really contribute to the objective of the regulation. So that is why, given the singularities of coffee, today what we are proposing is a different line of thought as to be able to best ensure this objective that will be inclusive of smallholder farmers and also will actually contribute directly to curbing deforestation and avoid the fact that risk can be diverted from one market to another. So instead of sourcing the EU, they might be able to go to a different country, consuming country, to provide them with the coffee. So this risk assessment approach is based on a three-step approach that would be really focusing on where the challenge we understand is. So it's in the fact in being able to regenerate forests as well. So as a first step, what we would be proposing is to identify, firstly, the level of risk. This can be done, for instance, through the Copernicus system, which is the EU Earth's monitoring system, but always we believe in alliance as well with, or in alignment with, the producing countries that need to be fully aware of what color, for instance, or which level of risk is going to be applied for them. The second one, as a second step, we would need a good harmonized country breakdown. We are aware that in each country, the definition of how it's broken down into areas, provinces, municipalities, jurisdictions is different. So there should be some type of standardization so everyone can understand the same. And as a third step, we would need to apply a cut-off date using the one suggested by the European Commission as 31st of December of 2020. What would need to be done is to cross-reference the risk areas together with the supply chain mapping information using, for instance, Galileo. So with this system, this risk assessment approach that was already mentioned by the European Commission, and we just see it as an enhanced risk assessment approach, we would be able to promote regenerating agriculture ecosystems, always in strong partnership with producing countries, and we would avoid diverting the risk to other markets. So therefore, we would really be able to curb deforestation. And now I will be coming into my last slide in regards to the risk assessment approach. We would end up with 3 different levels of risk. A low risk area, which would be the one related directly to no deforestation after the cutoff date, and therefore the requirement would be traceability to the region level. Obviously, it would be important to have an annual update to ensure that the commodity is still being sourced from a low risk area. The second one would be a medium risk area where there would be deforestation after 2020, but there would be mechanisms in place and a strong engagement in place to be able to secure that the area is being reforested. In this particular case, traceability of the area or municipality would be required. Here we would really like to highlight once again the relevance of the producing countries. We really believe that the local and national authorities should be at the heart of the development and to be able to ensure compliance with the framework agreement that would feature obviously a roadmap, a target and a timeline. And we believe that these frameworks should be between public, private and civil society if we really want to make them effective and effective at the end of the day. And last but not least, we would have the high risk areas where import into the EU would not be feasible because there would be deforestation after the cutoff date and there is no engagement whatsoever in the area to be able to ensure regeneration of the forest. However, if a program is put in place, one that's obviously with all the paperwork is authorized by the national authorities as well, then if this high risk area can evolve into a medium risk area, then import into the EU would be feasible. And once again, always trying to look out for the smallholder farmers and to really be able to make a difference. So this is why we're saying let's focus all our efforts in halting deforestation in the medium, the high risk areas, and then obviously we have to monitor the low risks, but without all the requirements that are so challenging and such a struggle for coffee producers. So last but not least, we would really like to highlight the belief that sustainability is a shared responsibility, as we mentioned, for authorities, national, from producing countries, also from consuming countries. Industry has a huge role to play as well, as do consumers. So going back to where we started, we really wish to highlight the sector's commitment because we really do want to be part or a proactive part of the process to be able to reduce EU-driven deforestation and obviously to be able to promote more sustainable business practices as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Helene. I mean, again, I appreciate that everybody tried to be very fast, but the whole process was a bit slow. So we are, or in theory, at the end of so I will have a couple of ideas here to share. First of all, on the willingness to stay a little bit longer. There are, say, a number of questions raised, but also options, you know, by the speakers that could be addressed. Now, I'm checking now if you can go back to the list of the participants. If I collected a few, there were a few also on the chat, but this we can be shared with everybody else. Now, is Astrid still there? I'm not sure that she has.
Yes, I am.
Yeah, oh yeah, you are. Sorry, I didn't see.
But not for much longer, I'm afraid.
Yeah, no, I know. No, I think, you know, look, if I can first, before open the floor, I want also to mention that there are other regulations, deforestation. I asked, in fact, a colleague from UNEP that wanted to share some highlights about also UK do regulations. Now, with the lack of time, maybe Beatrice, if you could just share the documents and I believe would be definitely some other follow-up. The second point is the questions were related, maybe let me formulate it like that first, is we learned that the process is very tight. Now, ideas came out today, well, not only to have resources, but also how to make different changes. How can you explain to us, how is the process? Is any opportunity, I mean, you're engaging with partners, you're engaging with stakeholders, you're engaging with industry. Is the process already closed, or there is still an opportunity, like, you know, question about the localization, or, you know, country level compare, or commodity versus country? So there were many things, I think, that could make a difference, of course, in the way coffee, in this case, the coffee sector will be able to react. You see, there is a very much generalized, of course, keen interest in reducing deforestation, but on the mechanism rather, and on the supporting measure is what I believe the most of the speakers spoke about, and about the strategy for supply side and so on. Well, can you give us an highlight of that?
Yeah, sure. I'll do my best. So no, the process is not closed, but I think at least one or two speakers before me have highlighted it's moving very fast, and it's moving faster than we have ourselves anticipated, and it is due to the fact that the current French presidency, council presidency, has made this a major priority, and also the European Parliament has been calling as a matter of urgency for such measures, and is therefore also really, you know, putting a lot of effort together to move forward as quickly as possible. And as was explained, so in the Parliament, something called a rapporteur, so Parliament designates one member who examines the Commission proposal a bit more closely, and then writes a report about it with their own suggestions. And the suggestions that come from the European Parliament are, of course, the thoughts of the parliamentarians themselves, but also parliamentarians live in society, so they are the result already of a very sort of intense engagement with stakeholders that is taking place, and also with third countries and many others. So I think some of the concerns that we have heard here have, of course, also already been taken to the European Parliament and are now brought to us via the European Parliament. So that is clear. So in that sense, I would say proposals that would aim at turning over completely a system or having a completely different way of risk assessment at this stage, I think are probably not very likely to succeed. The most important message would really be, and I think this has been said also by many speakers before me, is to start preparing. And in that context, I have to say we're really impressed also by the commitment of the sector. So not only the European Coffee Federation that has spoken very eloquently just now, but also producers around the world have started looking at this regulation, saying, what does it mean for us and how can I comply? And that is for us very encouraging. And in this discussion, how can I comply? And that is one of my 2 or 3 maybe main messages that I would just like to quickly get across in reply to all the things that we've heard right now, is to reconfirm that this is an exercise in which not the European Union can act on its own, but where we have to engage with our partner countries. And it was, for example, absolutely fantastic to hear also from the German colleagues that also our member states sort of say, okay, how can we help as well, and what can we do in order to support capacity building? So this is certainly, I think, a key aspect that we want to bear in mind. I wanted, if I may, answer to just mention a few more concrete concerns that were raised. And you've also seen I have my colleague Diego Torres with me, who's much more knowledgeable than I am, and who has already been trying to save time and answering a few questions in writing. And
very much appreciated.
and he will certainly improve on what I'm going to say or elaborate further. But I think on this issue of tracing to the plot of land, I think that has been mentioned also by a number of speakers as a concern. And I think there are a number of things to say. First of all, is we need to be very sure in sort of understanding what this means. So we're not talking about the individual coffee bean, obviously, in this proposal. We're not sort of saying that a company needs to know where each coffee bean comes from, but it does mean that all plots of land that would be involved in a precise shipment need to be identified, and that the commodities are not mixed at any step of the process with commodities of unknown origin. Now, this is again not something we have just identified and said, okay, it's going to work. We have analyzed this very carefully, and again, I point colleagues to our impact assessment. But of course, we have also built on best practice. So basically, what we want to do is best practice in the sector is supposed to become the standard of the sector. So that is what this is about. So there are already economic operators and certification organizations that work or offer the possibility of working to this standard that the new regulation is setting. And the other point that is super important to consider, and all of that when we talk about the impact of stakeholders, on smallholders, apologies, apart from focusing our cooperation efforts on smallholders, and I think Carla Montesi has been clear about that, the colleague from Germany has been clear about that in our cooperation efforts, that's something we look at, but is also to reiterate again the 2020 cutoff date. So that means, again, the vast majority of production that is going to be going on now will not be affected. So it is only about smallholders that would be moving into newly deforested land to produce, for example, coffee. So they would start a new cultivation, and in this new cultivation, they would have to meet the obligations of the regulation, which, by the way, we do not think are technologically particularly demanding, because when we're talking essentially about having a mobile phone in order to be able to determine what is the geolocalization of the particular plot. I think a super important message was also, I said already, invest and get in preparing now. There will still be some time until the rules become operational. We cannot say how much time that will be because we're not the master of the legislative process or the subsequent negotiations, but we are in an extraordinarily early stage engaging with you. So we try to also offer you maximum time to do that. We listened also very carefully to the concerns about, I'm not quite sure how to paraphrase them, raised, for example, by Anando in relation to Colombia, saying, coffee is not actually contributing to deforestation, especially in particular parts of the country, and yet this may be identified as a high-risk part of the country. I mean, I understand those concerns. I think the important thing to bear in mind is then to ask ourselves, how does it work in practice? So point number one, even if the coffee would come from a high-risk area, the coffee can still be imported in the European Union. Point two, there are no additional due diligence obligations whatsoever, even if the coffee comes from an area that might have been identified as a high-risk country. The only thing that would happen, possibly, is that authorities take a closer look. But authorities in the European Union, I mentioned this information system before, they will also have information, and I'm sure Colombia and the industry will make that information readily available to perhaps say, well, in part X of country Y, deforestation is going on, but it is actually linked to the cultivation of soy, whereas coffee has always been, at the same level. So this is also things that countries will know, and that through this information system will also be more widely available. So I think the concerns, while I understand them, are not as serious from my perspective as they perhaps may appear on first reading of the regulation. And I don't know if Diego wants to elaborate further on that, but I thought that was important to mention. I have a couple of questions, but we won't have time to discuss them now. Also to Ellen's presentation, where she identified conflicts of national legislation. I find it very difficult to see a conflict. The fact that national legislation may not oblige producers to do certain things does not mean that producers cannot do them in order to comply with the regulations of the market to which they want to export. And in fact, this is the usual thing. If you want to put a commodity or a product on a third country market, you have to understand what are the rules of the market in which you want to operate. And industry, of course, is perfectly able to do that. There was also a question on certification, but I mean, I see Diego has already switched on his camera, and you've heard me speak far too much, and I'm getting faster and faster. So I'm handing to Diego, who's also always speaking fast, but he'll be able to complete.
Thank you, Astrid. No, I mean, I wouldn't add anything to what you have said on those questions, just maybe to address the question raised by Mr. Debela from Ethiopia, no, on certification. He mentioned that many of the farmers are already working with certification organizations, including, I think, Fairtrade, Rainforest Alliance, and so on. So the stance that we have taken in this regulation proposal, of course, all those efforts are going to be taken into account. They can be very fruitful. The more farmers are working with higher standards, the more likely operators importing from those farmers will be able to comply with the regulation new rules, right? So basically, the proposal sets out a system by which companies, EU importers in this case, will be able to use certification to provide some of the information that is required by the regulation within the due diligence systems. But the use of those systems will not release companies from the legal obligations and from their legal responsibility if any breach of any violation or any breach of the regulation is committed. So basically, that will be the situation. We are aware of many certification organizations that are already working under the, for example, traceability requirements that are foreseen in the regulation, that work with segregated supply chains, that are helping to map via GPS coordinates numerous cooperatives, farmers in many countries of the world. So all of that work will be taken into account, but of course, with the limit that their legal responsibility will always remain with the operator, the European company that will be importing the merchandise.
Well, thank you. There are a few more questions now. You know, we are about 18 minutes behind schedule, and I'm not sure we can take one or two questions, because we have Ambassador Farani from Brazil. I think I will give him the floor because also is the spokesperson for the exporting members to have a very quick questions, and then we would just like to have to launch a survey, because that's clear, you know, we see the participation and the questions. We have to, this is just a first step, but we have to get more engaged as ICO, engaging our members and all the stakeholders. So Master Farani, I'll give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Gerardo. First of all, just to thank you for organizing this. I think that it was very opportune to have this discussion. During the last council, we asked that ICO would engage in a dialogue with the European Union Commission and also with the European Parliament in order to discuss this project of law more extensively. I think it will be in the advantage of everyone. We have sent a note stating our point of views. We think that unfortunately the law will cause damages to producers, although the cutoff date of December 2020 is a good thing that it remains there. Of course, we are all in Brazil, and I think elsewhere, committed to the preservation of the environment. There's no doubt about that. But we have to be very careful how to address the problem. I think cooperation is the best way to deal with the problem. I know that we need some practical measures also. We need to be fast because the climate change is there. But I hope that the law can be adjusted to make it better, to make it more adaptable to the producing countries. I have here with us Marcos Montes from Secafé, Brazil, and he has a few things to say. If you don't mind, Gerardo, I will pass the word to Marcos.
The indulgence for like 2 more minutes, Astrid. I think she's been very, very patient, and Diego as well, and everybody else. Yes.
And Gerardo, I hope that you continue with this initiative.
Yes.
We have to discuss more. Thank you. Marcos, please.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Pataconi. Permit to speak some minutes about our point of view, just to reaffirm that we have been mentioned today. The Brazilian coffee, in the same way, we are sustainable with the special attention, social, environmental, and economic. More efforts are being made to enable farmers on sustainable practices. It's important to mention the digital inclusion, rural connectivity, observing the carbon balance in residues, water, and the traceability that was mentioned here. For example, last year we exported almost 41 million bags to European Union, and 41% exported, 47% to European Union. Around 21% are differentiated coffees with high quality standards and sustainability seals and certifications. In other words, certification systems are already in place and generate better prices for farmers, premium marketing. So it's a concern. Ms. Eileen mentioned on her presentation about that. And our concern about the new regulation is related to generation of bureaucracy on companies and on the trade flow. How would the current certifications systems with traceability and the premium payments to farmers work in this sense? And certifications must continue to constitute a market differential and not become a way to market access. Compulsory certification, in our point of view, excludes small and medium-sized farmers and transfer part of the income that should pay for farmers to audits. In this way, it would harm small farmers and consequently the entire trade flow, making product more expensive and putting even more pressure on inflation rate in the countries. So for example, in Brazil, 72% of the farmers are above 20 hectares, 78% access the rural credit focus for family agriculture. So we have to pay attention for one more issues, the general data protection, international debated and regulated. According to the new rules that we analyzed today, proof will be made through satellite images, considering the properties, the plot geolocalizations, how to use this information without exposing particular informations and images of rural properties to the next chains. The images have high precision, the infrastructure, the families, people that live there. So it's sensitivity data for that legislations before the new regulation. So, and coffee is produced outside of European Union. You know that it's a healthy beverage. Millions of Europeans increase the consumptions, generate income in consumption and producing countries. So we have to work together in a collaborative task. One more thing we had put, last week we received Ms. Ngozi Iela, the General Director at World Trade Organization. We mentioned that new regulation. And in that occasion, 51 agriculture organizations from Brazil stay with her. And we mentioned that Brazil hopes that the world will rediscover the path of multilateralism and the new barriers to trade has not to be created. So the World Trade Organization is an important forum for debating the new European regulation, just to be aware that. So we are available for sharing our current experience.
Thank you. Thank you, Marcos. I think there were a lot of interesting elements. I don't know, Astrid, if you...
I like listening to Marcos because I saw in the background containers from my hometown, Hamburg. So it was a pleasure to see that. No, look, certainly WTO has to play a role, and certainly our rules have to be compatible with the WTO. And I can assure everybody in this call that we have looked at that very closely, because that's important for us, because we are the ones that talk about the rule-based international system. So we would like to make sure that our own rules actually respect, our own regulations actually respect those rules. And I think we are confident that they are, because we have paid attention to that. I think there were a couple of important points made. The first thing I want to say is we are aware that Brazil is an important producer and an important partner for the European Union. There's no question in that. I just want to mention that my commissioner, so Commissioner Sinkevicius, the boss of all of us in the DG Environment, is in Brazil today, I believe, or yesterday, and he is precisely also visiting Brazil, and by the way, also Colombia, because these are two key countries that we know will be affected by the regulation. He went there because he wanted to see firsthand not only deforestation, but also what efforts are being made to combat deforestation, what are the sustainability policies in place. And he's meeting and has been meeting with his counterparts as we speak. I haven't seen the report yet, but I think it will also be interesting for us to hear. And certainly also, I think the ambassador may be aware that our ambassador in Brazil is very, very active, very engaged, and I think also would welcome further exchange to specifically understand, I think it was also something Marcus now mentioned, understand what could be specific avenues of support or cooperation or dialogue that we should be exploring further in order to make sure that Brazilian operators can comply with the regulation. Just to say, you mentioned, Marcus, a lot the issue of certification. I think Diego has already explained the role of certification systems. I just want to add two things to that. I mean, or three. I mean, one is we have examined certification systems quite closely. We have in fact done a study, and again, it's public on our website, to look at at various certification systems. And the picture, to be frank, is mixed. There are some that are quite good, and some where one has a number of concerns in relation to their governance, transparency, reliability, etc. Certification system also can themselves be very helpful, clearly, and that's why their role is recognized, as Diego was explaining. They can also be a market access barrier, because sometimes they also cost money and it's not always possible for smallholders to attain this certification, which is one reason why we also have to sort of put this in perspective, how the role of certification needs to be seen. But lastly, if Brazilian coffee operators are sustainable, as you say, and do not contribute to further deforestation, then they will come to the market and they will no longer have the competition of other coffee producers that do contribute to deforestation. And if they come on top of it with the certification label, and the certification systems are very good in marketing, of course, also their products, then I think that will only provide an additional advantage to certified Brazilian sustainable coffee that has not contributed to deforestation. I think those were the main points I wanted to make very quickly. I have to apologize.
Yeah, I think you have to.
I have another meeting.
We pushed everybody beyond the reasonable, and you know, I normally we try not to, but I think it's been extremely interesting. And then I really thank you, Acid, and you and all the colleagues, I think Zoltan, that facilitated this. There is just one last point, but I say, you know, we try to put all these elements together. We want to see that, you know, we want to voice the concern of the coffee producers, because that's our role. But also, you know, because we have also the important member, also the EU, so that's the forum for discussion, and the task force with this public and private dimension. We will launch now a very quick survey pool, but you know, Astrid, you will be definitely excused, but we thank you so much for your, I mean, availability, not just the knowledge and the interest, but to be able to stay with us all the time. And while thanking everybody, I'll ask Veronica to launch the survey. Clear as ICO and the task force, we will be looking to that. Please, you know, if you have time to see. Eileen, while we're doing the survey, want to make a statement. I give her the floor. us, again, but thank you so much. So we wanted to see what is the perception of things that have to be done. Look, it's always difficult. We were in a physical meeting, we would just go for a coffee and a drink and continue talking and exploring. But this is a first step in this direction. We wanted to see what everybody think we should do, and we will be discussing that. And then Beatrix also share this presentation. I think, thank you very much for being with us. We wanted to see, we'll take note, and then we will do within the task force and within the council with all the members to try to see what will be the next step. We have some resources and we try to do. Also, let me say that at the beginning, there was a question of language. We will try to move into regional meetings, and then so the possibility to do with different languages, or as suggested, to look into additional resources. So this is more or less what we say. Clearly, we want to have the task force to get engaged. You see that, well, it's not as strongly polarized, rather than raising. Eileen, thank you very much for also participation. But this again is one step forward. We will collecting all this linked information. We will be sharing the recording and the presentation, and then we will discussing within the task force and the ICO how to continue this process and give, all the answers. There are a lot of opportunities for also mobilizing additional resources to address the issues, and I think we took note of that. With this, I'll thank you very much for your patience. Is it's 3:52, 32 in London. I wish you a lovely good day, evening, or morning, wherever you are. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.